first years, my name's Claire. I'm currently undertaking veterinary bioscience 2, and as a part of my professional skills, I thought I would talk to you today about one of the placements that I undertook last year, actually at a goat and sheep dairy. It gave me such a different insight into breeding and welfare at a sheep farm. So it's really important at a sheep dairy to be looking at the kind of sires you're using, because you want to increase your genetics as much as possible so that you're just producing sheep which are going to have peak lactation and produce lots of high quality milk. So to do this, what they do is the farm I was at used genetic testing on all of their rams to see their cheese index score. And so the cheese index score determines how much cheese and how high quality it can be expected that their offspring will produce in the future. And the cheese index score then sorts the rams into 3 different tiers. So the lowest tier is rams that are producing pretty much unusable offspring in terms of lactate production, and these rams, you can't really sell them onto other farms, so instead they are sent to abattoirs for meat. The next level is the mid-tier, so they produce good milk but not the quality that the farm that I was at was looking for. So what they would do with these ones is they actually get exported to China, where they get sold over there, because the Chinese sheep milk market is significantly larger than Australia's. Finally, you have the high tier sheep, and these sheep produce great cheese index scores, which means their female offspring should have a very high lactate content. That is exactly what we're looking for. So these sheep are actually used at the farm for the purpose of breeding. This farm use artificial insemination, so AI breeding, to select the traits they want from their females and males to produce, the best offspring that they possibly can. So at this farm, artificial insemination was done laparoscopically. So that is when, after using linocaine to numb the site, 2 incisions are made into the ewe, and then a camera and a needle are inserted. And so you can, with the camera, you can see exactly where the needle is. You can see the sperm get released exactly into the ovum to produce offspring. And so the farm I was at found that using this produced 90% efficiency of reproduction and the pregnancy holding. So that was significantly greater than just natural mating, and that's why they kind of chose to do this. But they had to take into consideration that you need a vet to perform this procedure. Luckily, they have a vet on staff, but it wouldn't be viable in all enterprises. There's some companies that will provide semen based on the genetic qualities that you're after, so it means that you also don't necessarily have to house male sheep. Another consideration is that before performing laparoscopic artificial insemination, you need to ensure that your sheep haven't had access to food for 12 hours, which would be really hard to do if your sheep were feeding in paddocks. But because these sheep are in an intensive farming system, you can limit the amount of feed they have, but you also wouldn't want to do that if your sheep had pre-existing health conditions such as diabetes. Finally, on a sheep dairy, you get to help with neonatal care, because what happens is the sheep stay with their mums for the first 12 hours so that they can receive the colostrum that is required for them to build up an immune system to fight infection. But after that, because the ewes are at peak lactate, they need to go back into the milking herd so they can be milked, because that is when you are going to get your peak product, which is what you're after running a farm. Lambs are separated and they're raised in pens based on the day they were born, not their weight or gender. And in these pens, they have access to teats like you would if you were hand feeding, except these teats are attached to a vat so that they have access to unlimited supply of milk, but they don't necessarily know how to use that at the start. So one of my jobs on placement, which I loved, was on their first day, I had to go in and get all of the lambs to attach to the teat 4 times a day. And this slowly weaned off as the days went along, or as the lambs got more confident, until the 3rd day when it was no longer required. We also, in the first few days, had to give them a yogurt probiotic, just because being separated from their mums, they don't develop the gut bacteria that would be needed to fight in microbial infection. So we gave them yogurt. You should be leaving the smallest lambs with their mothers. And that's not something that was done on my placement because peak lactate. So if they kind of wanted to increase the survivability of their lambs, they should be leaving the smaller ones with their mothers. However, that does kind of then decrease the amount of milk yield they're going to get, which is their income. So it's really kind of hard to balance. So I found it relatively easy to gather information to build my AHEMS placement report, particularly in the topics surrounding breeding and welfare and that kind of management, because I was working within breeding and welfare, so I got all of my information on weaning and stuff very easily because that's what I was doing in a day-to-day scenario. I was helping with the weaning. So I could get that from kind of first-hand experience, and then that kind of led on to conversations with the placement team about what had led up to that event. So we could talk about artificial insemination and their breeding protocols and kind of get that understanding. I found it a lot harder though to generate an understanding of what kind of goes on in the non-animal care side of the business, so things like pasture and KPIs, because I wasn't working with the people that deal in that area. So in the future, what I would try and do is I would try and sit down and talk to people who work in an agricultural background, working on the pasture care for that business, because we didn't really need to worry so much about the natural pasture as being an intensive farm. It's not what the sheep were eating, but that would be really important and something for me to consider in the future if I was working as a livestock vet, to look at what kind of pasture the animals had access to. So it would probably be really important for me on future placements to get an understanding of pasture native to that region by talking to people who work specifically in that sector. One of the most valuable experiences that I had on placement was also one of the hardest experiences I had on placement, and it wasn't the sheep dairy, but it was with the goats, and we had to euthanize a couple of goats. I work at a vet clinic, so I have seen euthanasias before, but I'd never seen them with a captive bolt gun, so it was the first time I kind of got to see the captive bolt euthanasias, which was, it's confronting, but it's something that you have to see because as a vet, this is what we have to deal with. So it improved on my knowledge because I understood now what goes into the captive bolt euthanasia, what happens if it goes wrong and they don't die instantly, how to check for all of those vital signs to see if they're still alive. And this allowed me not only to develop an understanding of the animal husbandry side of euthanasia, but to develop skills in communication with farm managers and people that work with these animals regarding why euthanasia was the appropriate method in this time. So after watching this video, I hope that you guys will consider doing one of your AHEMS placements at a goat and sheep dairy.